So, thank you. Thank you for still being awake, I hope. So I'm Joost van Dongen. I'm founder and creative director of Galaxy Grove, and I will be talking today about how we use procedural generation in Station to Station, that's the name of our game, to create levels super quickly. After a year of work on all the procedural systems and everything, a single designer was able to make all 32 levels for the game in just 5 weeks, including playtesting and iteration. And in the next 30 minutes, I'll be explaining how we did that. As you can see, I'm moving around a lot and talking fast and loud and stuff. It's the end of the day, so I'm trying to keep you all awake, pumping some live adrenaline into the room. I'm totally not doing it because I put in too many slides for a 30-minute presentation. Don't tell anyone. So what will I be talking about? I'll do a short introduction of who I am. I'll do a little explanation of what Station to Station is. Then I'll talk a bit about the gameplay generation for Station to Station, then a bit about the art generation. I'll talk a bit about how we then threw away a lot of that and used handmade stuff for a part of it and then brought about a lot of it back in. And that's going to be about it. I hope this is the last version of the presentation because it looks a bit outdated, but we'll see in a moment whether they actually used the last one. Who I am? I'm a robot, as you can see. I was saying, founder of Galaxy Grove, previously co-founder of Ronimo Games, so I was technical director, made a bunch of games on my own as well in my spare time. I have a master in game design from the HKU and a master in game tech from Utrecht University, so I have very much a split mind between creative side and technical side and the business side as well. I enjoy all of it basically. These are some of the games that we made at Ronimo, Awesomnauts being the most famous one, sold about 2 million copies. That's a imagine League of Legends, but as a side-scrolling action platformer. It's from 2012 already, so very long time ago. These are the games I've made on my own as solo projects. For my solo projects, I like to make the craziest shit I can imagine. That especially goes for Cello Fortress. Cello Fortress is a game where I sit on a stage, like here, live playing cello and controlling the game with the cello and playing against a few people in the audience. So it doesn't get much crazier than that. I've done performances all over Europe with that. More recently, RoboMaestro was actually presented here at Everything Procedural 2 years ago. It's a procedural music toy, and it's for free on Steam, so give it a try if you like. And I have a dev blog. Well, it's been a while since I last wrote on there, but there's over 100 in-depth articles on there about all aspects of game creation, from tech, art, design, audio, business, marketing. Basically, I've written about all kinds of different things. And Galaxy Grove, this is my new studio, founded it 2 years ago. We're currently 12 people. We're located in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And we specialize in making management and building games with strong atmosphere, beautiful graphics, and unique mechanics. That's what we try, at least. Before I dive into the procedural stuff, a little bit about Station to Station. This is the game that we launched last October, and I'd like to give a short explanation of what it is, and let's first have a look at a short video of it. So this is all captured in real time in Unreal 4, and it launched last October on Steam. So buy it, give us your money, please. The core gameplay for Station to Station is that you get a map with a bunch of buildings on it, like cities, bakeries, factories, and then you connect these with railroads, put trains on it, and then you get money for making those connections. And the thing that costs money is building railroads, and you pay more if the railroad is very long, and you pay a lot more if there's a bridge in it. And so, for example, you connect a wheat farm with a mill, then the mill produces flour, connect the mill with the bakery, and the bakery produces bread, connect the bakery with the city, and the people are happy and well-fed. Also important to note here is that while Station to Station looks like a management game, this one is actually a puzzle game. Our next game is a real management game. But here it's a puzzle game. There's no economic simulation running over time. You just get money for making a connection, and that's it. So the difficulty of the game is very much determined by the landscape and by the distances between buildings. Then, how did we go about making this? Something I should mention is that station to station, well, it's Unreal 4, it's C++ and Blueprint. A lot of it is custom code, and all the generation happens on load on the player's computer when they start a level, so we don't bake anything beforehand. So, when I started making this game, at first it was just me. During development we grew to a team of 8 people around launch, but the first version was just me on my own. And I wanted to experience the game myself while making it, and it's very hard with a puzzle game, because if I make a puzzle then I already know the solution, and that makes it very boring to play, so I'll never know whether I'm enjoying the game. So I figured, well, let's try procedural generation for the puzzle generation. So this is the very first playable prototype for the game after about a week of work. You see some stations and railroads and buildings here and tiny little trains going over straight lines. And the core gameplay was there, and the buildings are just randomly plopped. Just to pick a random XY position and a random building type and drop it, and that's it. So that's very simple, but at least I could experience it very quickly. A very simple improvement I did to that is that buildings need to keep a minimum distance from themselves, which basically means they don't overlap anymore. And buildings that need to connect with each other get a larger minimum distance so that you can never make a station that already connects, for example, both a wheat farm and a mill at the same time, because then it doesn't make sense to still put a train on that. And that was actually for quite a while enough to be able to enjoy the game and figure out what the game is about. Now keep in mind that while it's a puzzle game, it's a very open-ended puzzle game, and there are always a million solutions. So it's not that exact what we're making. So we have that basic gameplay, and now we need some landscape generation. So, well, I guess most people here know what a Perlin noise is. It's just a noise based on an XY position. And procedural generation is very often a matter of combining noises and applying operations on noises. And this is also the case here. So the first thing we do is just use a Perlin noise as a height map, and that's it. Already with a little bit of the voxel aesthetic, but that doesn't matter for gameplay. So this was the first step. Thing is, from a gameplay perspective, this is irrelevant because slopes don't matter in the game, bridges do, but you don't need a bridge here anywhere, so you're still making straight lines. So this maybe looks a little bit interesting, but from a gameplay perspective, nothing changed. So next step is to apply a thresholding on it. Basically, if the Perlin noise is below a certain value, then we make the ground flat on a low level. If it's high, then high level, and otherwise somewhere in the middle. And then you get something like this. This is already a lot better, because now whenever we want to go off a cliff, we need a bridge, and that's expensive, and that's gameplay. Thing is that here it's still not very interesting, because all the areas are plateaus, and wherever you go off them, you always need a bridge. So it doesn't matter that much where you go off a thing. So we need an alteration between slopes and cliffs. So for the next step, I took another noise, just another Perlin noise, and I used that to do a blend between a version with and without cliffs. So as you can see, we get slopes, and they gradually turn into cliffs again. And now it becomes more of a choice what you do, because as a player, if you have a building here, then you can be like, oh, I go straight down, or go all the way around, maybe that's cheaper. And now we get some gameplay out of the landscape. So, as you can see here, cliffs are very clear curves. That's because of the Perlin noise. It's not a very natural look. So next I add another noise which is a lot more detailed and just a little bit of it, and that makes the edges a lot less clear curves, and it makes it a bit more natural. Then the next step is I add anti-plateaus. I read this in my code recently while making this presentation, and I have no idea what those actually are. And that's actually a good example of how procedural creation often works. Often you're playing around with noises and you're like, hey, now it looks great. Okay, I gotta keep this. And maybe it doesn't make sense, and then you're like, oh, but I need to give this a name. Anti-plateaus. Okay. But that's kind of what procedural creation is often like. You're experimenting and trying things, and sometimes you find something that works, but that you can't really explain. And then another thing I did is add a detail noise. This is just another small scaled Perlin noise to make it all a little bit less flat. And then we combine all of that and we get something like this. And this is actually very nice for gameplay. This is a fun well, this map doesn't have buildings, but like the landscape part of this is decent for gameplay in station to station. And when I pitched the game to publishers, this is actually what the game looked like. And it was fun to play, so I got it signed, I got a budget, and managed to hire people and get into production. Now, I did not pitch with only this. I also had this. This is a bit of concept art that someone made for me. I hired a concept artist to make this voxel art, and I showed this to publishers. I say, this is what it'll look like, and this is how it plays. Imagine these two together. And one publisher was crazy enough that they gave me money to do it, and they got lucky I actually pulled it off. So we need to go to this. So once we got budget, I hired a full-time voxel artist called Dima, and the first thing I asked him to do is create a little landscape with all the elements that I wanted. So it has cliffs, it has slopes, it has a train, it has a building, trees, grass, a little bit of everything. And I asked him to just ignore all the rules, just make something cool. And then we could use this as a reference for, okay, this is what the generator needs to make. We need to transform that thing that we already had into this. And then I also asked him to make two variations, a desert and a Wild West scene. And the idea is that this is, from a gameplay perspective, the exact same map, and we need algorithms that can transform that map into all three of these. And I put these all really big on the wall in our office, and when the other coder and I were working on it, we often were pointing at it together like, oh, this thing here, how are we going to make this? So we use this as a target for our algorithms. So the first step in that direction was increasing the voxel resolution. This looks very boring. There's an enormous amount of technical work involved in this because a map in station to station can have, without any optimizations, happily have as much as 30 million polygons on just the landscape, which is not okay for the generator or for the renderer, so we need a lot of clever optimizations for that. But I'm going to skip that because we're talking procedural generation and not rendering today. Well, Dima made a bunch of textures. Here there's a grass texture on a landscape similar to the one we already saw. So that's already a big step. One random building because the game crashes if I don't put a building in there. The next step is cliffs. Cliffs need to look better than just, well, here cliffs, as you can see, are straight lines. That's of course not what a real cliff looks like. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the basic idea is that we apply a small smoothing on the height map so that we get a bit more gradual thing. Then we apply a noise to the height map on the place of the cliff so that it doesn't look like a smooth curve. We apply a special texture to it. At the edges, we apply some dithering to fade out the texture. And then you put a lot of effort into it and you get something like this. So next step, props. Because by this point we have a decent landscape, but it's an empty landscape. So by props I mean things like buildings, stones, flowers, that kind of stuff. Take a quick sip. Right, more pure adrenaline. Okay, so first step to props is, okay, Dima makes a bunch of models for trees and stuff like that, and we just randomly dump them on the map. And then you get something like this. Note that this is a desert with trees. The reason I did that for now is that it's much more readable from the back of the hall. Of course, in reality, we would combine these trees with a green landscape. So this is just for explanation purposes. But the thing is, if you put them all somewhere, then this is just a boring thing. There's no places here. There's a little bit of everything everywhere. So what do we do next? Well, the exact same thing as we saw earlier today in the Unreal procedural generation thing, which is make clumps, put stuff together. So this is the exact same amount of trees, but this time they're placed close to each other in groups. And it already looks a lot more interesting because now we have these little bushy areas and we have the open desert areas, and it starts to feel like it has a sense of place. This is still very basic. So next we start mixing more types of objects and making rules for what these clumps can be. For example, here I have a clump with 2 to 6 big trees and 5 to 10 small trees, and then every clump randomly chooses these numbers, so they're different sizes. And now it starts looking more interesting and more natural. So what we do in practice is that Dima made a lot of these models for a lot of trees and stuff, and he defined clumps based on that, based on what makes sense. And often he also has these rules of like, okay, the biggest objects are in the middle, and then some small objects, and then maybe one more big object a little bit farther away, and then a few more small objects. And he makes these rules, and he makes them specific for different types of maps. So on the desert map, I would use a different clump normally. So next step, ground coloration. Here the trees are just plonked on the map. No relation between the trees and the map. Here we change the ground around the trees to have a different color. So this is just a second texture, and then we switch which texture we use. And this looks a little bit weird because we're in the desert. If I put this on the right texture, then it starts to blend together a whole lot better, and now it feels like, oh, this is maybe an area that's a bit more mossy because of the shadows of the trees, or maybe there's leaves fallen or whatever, but there's something. The trees being there has an influence on what the ground looks like, and that's what I want. Then grass is also something that we can put in the clumps, and grass is just dumping a lot of little meshes in the level and then applying some wind physics to it and stuff like that. Conceptually very simple, technically quite complex because it's a lot of grass and they're all a bunch of polygons, and we also have sunflowers, which are more complex models and stuff. But conceptually it's just similar to the ground coloration, we can also plunk in some grass. And then Dima can also make clumps that only have grass or that only have ground coloration. He can use any combination of these things he likes. So this is what a finished level in the game looks like with all of these elements combined. If you zoom in, then you'll see a lot more of the grass, but the grass is there, like there's a lot of little grass models here and here. The gray area here is area that's unfinished in terms of gameplay. The world becomes nice and green as you're playing. So that's a gameplay thing. And the trees are also gray, a little bit grayscale in that area for that reason. So now we have a generator, and it generates pretty levels, but they're all a bit samey. Because the default approach when you make something like this is, oh, we have all these cool systems and all these models, and let's just randomly pick them and use whatever we randomly pick. And there's so many combinations, and they're all unique, right? But the thing is with procedural generation that if you do that, then everything starts looking the same quickly because all your maps have a little bit of everything. These two maps are completely different. There's not a single object in the same spot. The landscape, the hills, the cliffs, everything is different. But at a glance, this is the same level. And that happens so often in procedural generation. Even a brilliant game like No Man's Sky, if you've played long enough, at some point you start recognizing, oh, this is this planet again. And it's, of course, it's a variation. It's not actually the same planet, but it's too similar, and that makes it uninteresting in a sense. So that happens a lot in procedural generation. So what we try to do, since we have these small area levels anyway, is that for every level we chose a combination of elements that's very specific, and we didn't use anything else. For example, this is a level with dark trees and rivers, and nothing else. Well, a little bit of grass and stuff, but that's what you're seeing. And then another level doesn't have the dark trees at all. It has other stuff. It has maybe a lot of small bushes. And then it feels different. Then your mind can be like, oh, this is the dark trees level. Oh, this is the small bushes level. And you can recognize levels. Okay. And there are some other knobs that we can tweak, turn to create variation. Like we can make a level that's a different shape or a different size. We can switch the biome to desert. We can change the weather. We can change the lighting. We can put in animals. Well, animals are a very detailed thing, but when you zoom in, they make add a nice bit of personality to levels. And then from there, the next step was better gameplay generation, because we still had this super basic, just plop a bunch of buildings and make sure they're not too close to each other. The problem with that is that the difficulty is very hard to control with such a basic algorithm. Basically, if you look at these cities, connecting cities and station to station gives quite a lot of points. These two are very close, so that's a lot of points very easily. These two are far away. That's a harder challenge to get points there. And you randomly get, sometimes you get a lot of close ones, sometimes you don't get any at all, and it makes a huge difference. And sometimes your level is way too easy, sometimes it's impossible to finish, and there's no control from our perspective. So the new approach we did is that we distribute a number of positions over the map, the black numbers, and we make sure that they're not in a regular pattern, but that they are at a somewhat regular distance. And these will be our building positions, and this way we know that they are never too close, but also never too far away. And then we start generating the buildings from a randomly chosen center Here the center happens to be in the center, but the center might also have been here. So buildings are added to the level from there so that we don't get a situation where there's a building here and there and nothing in the middle. And that helps a lot. And then we add some rules, like the number of close cities that we want in the map. Okay, we want 2 cities to be close and all the other cities need to be far away from each other. Dual placements with 2 buildings being near each other so that a single station can service both, or also make the game a lot easier. So we want to define how many of those there are. And this is a huge improvement, makes the difficulty of the game much more controllable, but it's still not that great, really. So, then we made all these procedural generation systems, and then we switched to handmade gameplay. But it's not as bad as it sounds. We had this problem that it's hard to control difficulty. We also had the problem that it's hard to create remarkable places. If you look at this image, this is a remarkable place. It's a map with a single island in the middle and a very low cliff around it. And to get a generator to make a place like this, you almost need to make custom rules for just one level, because if you reuse this pattern, then it's also not unique anymore. And if you need to make a custom rule for every level, then your generator becomes extremely complex. So I wanted to avoid that. And even with the things that I already mentioned for making levels more unique, they were still too samey, both visually and too samey in terms of gameplay. And especially the early game was suffering from that, but the tutorial sometimes being really hard and sometimes really easy. And for a tutorial, I want to have a very strong control over difficulty. So, what we then did is switch to handmade gameplay. A level designer drew height maps in Photoshop. So Photoshop is our main level design tool. Level design places markers for where buildings are. At first, the markers were also in Photoshop. We had a list of grayscale colors, and each color defined a specific building. Our technical designer, Jordi, cried so much about this that he made a tool in Unreal to place the buildings, which was a lot better. And then for props, we only define the amounts of props we have. So we say, okay, I want 10 little forests in this level and 20 grass fields. Figure it out. And you don't say where you want them. And then with that information, we can generate the actual level. So if we look back at the procedural systems that I've already talked about, we can actually slot this in, and we're only removing the part that generates the height map. But all the other elements of turning this into nice art, we can keep everything else. So we're actually not throwing away that much. And this is super fast, because this means that whatever a designer does, the game always instantly turns it into a fully decorated level with all the art. Like these trees, they're procedurally placed. This is a handmade level, but what's handmade is only this, and the choice of where this city is. And it always looks good. And if the designer is like, oh, I made a mistake somewhere, I want to change it a bit, or I want to scale the level up or down or whatever, all the art automatically adjusts. So there's not this back and forth between the designer and the artist, and then the designer makes a change, and the artist hates the designer, and the designer needs to hide in their home for a week. We don't get that stuff. So that's really nice to be able to work that way. So Photoshop, really, for a level design tool? What kind of idiots are we? Well, really bad idiots, apparently. Thing is that the landscape tools in Unreal don't work with the kind of voxel aesthetic that we wanted, so we needed to make custom text for the landscapes. So we couldn't use those. Otherwise, it would, of course, be much nicer if an artist can sculpt the landscape and immediately see what's happening instead of going from Photoshop to the game. So yeah, Photoshop. By the way, the thing you see over here looks complicated, but in reality it's 3 different channels, red, green, blue, and separately they are much more readable. This is the height map, this is a map that defines where there's water, and this is a map that defines the biome. So here's green biome, and here's the desert biome. And combined, it looks a lot more unreadable than separated. So this is what the art designer actually works with. So thing is, with the toolchain we already had for generation, this was very easy to make. It took maybe a day or so to implement level creation, handmade level creation into the game. And with some practice, you'd be surprised to hear that this is actually very workable, and in a lot of cases not slower than doing it directly in Unreal. It does have some downsides because it takes a while to get used to the scale, and Lisa, the level designer, told me that she still had that she always starts with making a rough layout, putting it in game to see what the size even is, and then work from there. So it's a bit impractical, but with some practice, actually also a very fast workflow for her. Since we're procedurally generating all the props and stuff, and the glyphs and a lot of other things, if you make any change, then everything can change. All the props can choose a new position. It's deterministic, but if there's a change, then everything changes. Usually that doesn't matter, but every level has an opening camera where we choose a very pretty shot in the level. That's like the last step that an artist does. But if the designer makes a change to the level after that, then you might get stuff like this with a tree being very close to the camera right in front of the object that we're looking at. Now, the opening camera is literally the only place in the game where we have this issue. So our solution was to just test it close to launch again and adjust where needed. It's not actually that bad. One thing is that the detail noise that we had earlier, doing that in Photoshop on the height map turned out to be pretty cumbersome, and we were not able to get that to look as nice as just the Berlin noise had. I don't know exactly why, but since we had all these algorithms anyway, we just said, okay, add the detail noise that we already had to the Photoshop height map, and that's it. So we're still combining those. That does have some weird results in some cases, because we have this hand-painted height map, and then we add random heights to it. And sometimes you get stuff like this. This is water. As you can see, the water is floating above the ground. It was totally not floating above the ground when Lisa made this, but then the random noise was added to it, and it happened to move the landscape down there. This is a bug report by a beta player before launch of a very nice bit of floating lake. Easy enough to fix, but a bit cumbersome. And occasionally you'll see some weird things, like there's a river, and then right next to it, the landscape slopes down a lot, and there's a very low part, which doesn't make that much sense, but it's not really a big problem. So we still have this code for complete level generation, and we didn't think it was good enough for the campaign, but, well, we have it. Why not use it? Okay, Joost, let's use it. So we added it back in Sandbox mode, which is just a separate option where the player gets a screen with a bunch of options for what kind of map they want, and the difficulty they want, and a bunch of things. And then they can just play with that, and we totally just accept that the map might be a bit harder in some cases, or a bit simpler in other cases, and that they might be a bit samey, because this is a bonus feature after you've already played the full campaign. Well, you can start it before, but that's the idea at least. So that's really nice that we could just add this, and it was very little work, and it's a very cool feature to have. A lot of reviewers mentioned this as, oh, when you're done, you can still play the Sandbox mode. It's really cool. So that brings me to the conclusion of my talk, and I managed to drink enough pure adrenaline and talk fast enough that I'm actually staying within the 30 minutes, except for the stuff with the wrong slides part. So conclusion. Procedural generation makes playtesting your own games fun, so that's one reason that you might implement it, even if the end result won't be procedural generation. But it's hard to control uniqueness, it's hard to control difficulty, so we chose to define the main gameplay by hand and then generate all the art instantly. So it's a hybrid solution made in C++, made in Unreal 4. All the generation happens on the fly on startup for the user, so nothing is baked. And the result of this workflow is that one designer managed to make all 32 levels in just 5 weeks, including playtesting and iteration and getting the difficulty right, which I think is quite amazing. And when Lisa started and I said, I think you can do this in 5 weeks, she looked at me and was like, no. But she actually could. And without crunch, don't get me wrong, no crunch. Then one final thing. We regularly have internship openings. We're located in Utrecht here in the Netherlands. Basically every 6 months we have new internship openings. And for the coming period we have openings for 3D artist, technical designer and C++ programmer. So if you're looking for an internship now or later, be sure to get in contact. We're also looking for playtesters. We're of course making a new game. It's a top secret, super cool new game. It's also a management game. And basically you play for an hour and then it's an in development version, so it's not that great yet, and then we cry because it's not that great yet, and then we make improvements, and then someone else plays, and then we keep doing that, and at some point we launch the game, and we hope that it's great by that point. So if you'd like to play a top secret game at some point and share your thoughts on it, then please send an email to my colleague Naomi, or come say hi and grab my card after this talk. And yeah, I have the dev blog thing. And that's it, right under the 30 minutes. Yay!
Hi, Joost, thanks for your talk, fan of your work. I was wondering, from the height map, do you bake the level before making a build? Or could someone mod the game adding their own height map?
The height maps are currently saved in the Unreal file, so it's not that easy to make your own height map, but in principle, yeah, it's just, it loads the height map on the fly. There's no baking at all.
Ah, cool.
Awesome talk. Yeah, thanks. So a lot of the world is level is generated randomly, right? So how do you deal with difficulty when like some unforeseen stuff happens and suddenly the level spikes up like crazy? It's like, oh, there's a village and a river. It's like, oh crap, that was not intended.
Well, in the campaign, it's not randomly generated, so there we don't have that issue. And in general, there are enough buildings in the map that, like, well, when you start, there are maybe 5 of the buildings, and then gradually more get added as you're completing the level. But those 5 buildings offer enough different possible connections that usually when the game generates a few connections that don't work, then you can still do some other ones. So I haven't seen any cases where it actually generates something that's impossible. But it will generate some levels that are easier and some that are harder. And for the sandbox mode, we just accept that.
Right, so you get some fallbacks always to make sure that that stays fun.
Yeah, it's kind of inherent to the design of the game. It's not a pure puzzle game in the sense that there's this one solution that you must find.
All right, cool, thank you.
Any question?
Over there?
You have a question? Yes, sorry.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I wanted to ask, like, since you said that you decided to also implement the possibility to generate a new level, right? Like, is it possible, like, does the game actually also show you the seed for the level itself? Like, that may be something that, you know, can be shared with the community, or like you can also maybe have an option to just, you know, a thumbs up on the level. So maybe you get the seed and you can maybe use that information and that data on, you know, maybe to create another system that use that data to understand how to make new levels, right? Like maybe some...
Yeah, I think the question is, do we do anything fun with the seeds?
Oh, yes.
For the user? In the sandbox mode, the user can type the seed. So that means that they can also share the seed with their friends. We did not make any social features where you can thumbs up or thumbs down it, and then we store that in a server, and you can say, oh, give me the most thumbed up seed or something like that. That would be possible, but it's not something we've made.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I was wondering, when you had to completely generate levels for the campaign, why didn't you just generate like thousands of levels and skip through them really quickly and whitelist very interesting levels? Wouldn't that be faster?
Well, the problem with that is that if a level is cool but slightly off, then you don't really have any tools to fix it. And another problem with that is that our generator has a lot of stuff that it can't do. Like I showed that level with the center island thing and a deep cliff around it, and we never made actual generation for that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that the generator can't do right now. So for this approach, we'd first need to add a lot of options to the generator, and then do a lot of testing, and then cry because we can't solve actual problems. Because we've noticed that there is a lot of subtlety in making a really good map. And the sandbox modes won't do that, but in the campaign there's a lot of subtlety to the level design that's hard to put in code.
Okay, thank you. Very great talk.
I think there was a talk here, here in the front.
Yeah, I did have a question. Kind of a rendering question, I guess. In the preview that you showed us, there was some depth of field effects and like a tilt shift kind of look. That's in the game, right? How did you achieve the tilt shift effects during the game, and how did you manage it to make sure that the players focused on the thing that they need to be focused on?
Oh, right, yeah. That's a very good question, because that's a very hard I thought it was a very hard problem, at least before we started. Because I want the very strong depth of field blur so that you get a tilt shift-like effect, because that gives it this vibe of a little train miniature, because we wanted this train miniature world vibe. Well, technically getting a tilt shift-like effect is just saying to Unreal, give me the cinematic depth of field blur and set it very high. And that's it, Unreal just has it. In terms of focus, what we did is when you zoom in, we have a curve that controls the amount of depth of field blur and the focal distance. And as you zoom out to the level where you can actually play the game, because you can't really play the game when fully zoomed in, then from a certain distance, the depth of field blur is just faded out altogether. So there's no depth of field blur when you're fully zoomed out, and when you're playing, it's basically not there, and when you zoom in, we just tweaked it to a distance that felt good. And because the player is not really playing, but just looking, they accept it. But zoomed out and then depth of field blur is terrible, because you don't know where the player is looking, and you don't want the part where they're looking to be blurry.
Okay, thank you very much for the talk, Joost.